What if one of the most devastating tragedies in human history didn't begin with power, but with failure? What if the Holocaust was not born in a moment of madness, but slowly, quietly, in the mind of a man the world once ignored? And what if the truth is this? Hitler wasn't born hating Jews at all. So where did that hatred come from? How did it grow? And how did millions come to believe it? History often simplifies this story. We're told that Adolf Hitler hated Jews, and that hatred led to the Holocaust. But that explanation leaves out something critical. Hatred on that scale, industrial, systematic, state-controlled, doesn't appear overnight. It needs fuel, it needs conditions, and most importantly, it needs people willing to accept it. So the real question isn't just, why did Hitler hate the Jews? The deeper question is, how did an entire society come to accept that hatred as truth? And the answer is far more unsettling than most people realize. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden forces behind history's darkest moments, subscribe to Hidden History, because the past still has secrets left to reveal. Before the speeches, before the uniforms, before the world knew his name, Adolf Hitler was just a young man with a dream. He didn't want to rule Germany. He didn't dream of war. He wanted to paint. At 18 years old, Hitler arrived in Vienna, the cultural heart of Europe, carrying sketches, ambition, and the belief that he would become an artist. But Vienna had other plans. He applied to the Academy of Fine Arts, and he was rejected. Then he applied again, rejected again. The school told him he lacked talent. And just like that, the future dictator of Nazi Germany was dismissed as a failed artist. At first, it seemed like a small moment, a personal disappointment. But history would later reveal something chilling. That rejection may have been the first crack. Vienna in the early 1900s was unlike any city in Europe. It was brilliant, diverse, and deeply divided. Different cultures, languages, and religions lived side by side. Germans, Jews, Slavs, Hungarians. But beneath that diversity was tension. Nationalism was rising. Economic inequality was growing. And political leaders were beginning to exploit fear. Anti-Semitism, hatred toward Jews, was not new. It had existed in Europe for centuries. But in Vienna, it took on a new form. It became political, public, normalized. Newspapers spread conspiracy theories. Pamphlets claimed Jews controlled banks, media, and business. Politicians blamed them for society's problems. And one man in particular showed how powerful that strategy could be. Karl Lueger, the mayor of Vienna, charismatic, popular, and openly anti-Semitic. He used hatred as a political tool, and it worked. Crowds cheered him, voters supported him. And somewhere in that crowd, a young Adolf Hitler was watching, learning. Hitler was no longer living the life he imagined. He was poor. He lived in shelters. He sold cheap paintings to survive. And most importantly, he was angry. Angry at his failures. Angry at his circumstances. Angry at a world that had rejected him. But anger needs direction. And Vienna offered him something dangerous, an explanation. It told him that his failure wasn't his fault, that someone else was responsible, that there were enemies hiding in plain sight. And slowly, almost quietly, Hitler began to believe it. Not all at once, not dramatically, but piece by piece. The ideas around him gave shape to his frustration. They gave his anger a target, and that target became the Jews. But even then, 3 questions remained unanswered. If Hitler was just one man, how did his ideas spread so far? If these beliefs were already common, why did they become so deadly under him? And perhaps most disturbing of all, why didn't more people resist? Vienna didn't create Hitler's hatred, but it refined it. Here, he encountered radical writers who spoke of racial purity, as if it were science. He read theories that divided humanity into superior and inferior races. He heard arguments that Germany needed to be cleansed. And slowly, he began to see himself not as a failure, but as someone who had discovered the truth, a truth others refused to see. This is where something changed, because once someone believes they are right and the world is wrong, they stop questioning, and they start justifying. Then came 1914, World War I. For Hitler, the war offered something he had never truly had before: purpose, belonging. He joined the German army, even though he was Austrian by birth, because in his mind, he was German. On the battlefield, he found structure, discipline, identity. He was wounded, he was decorated, and for the first time in his life, he felt valued. But then, the war ended. Germany lost, and everything changed. To the world, Germany's defeat made sense, but to Hitler, it didn't. The army hadn't collapsed on the battlefield, so how could they have lost? The answer he found would become one of the most dangerous ideas in modern history. It was called the stab in the back myth, a conspiracy theory that claimed Germany wasn't defeated by its enemies, but betrayed from within. And according to this myth, the betrayers had names: communists, politicians, and most importantly, the Jews. There was no evidence, no proof. But in a nation humiliated by defeat, people didn't want truth. They wanted answers, simple ones. And Hitler was ready to give them. Because from that moment on, his hatred was no longer just personal. It had become political. It had become ideological. And most dangerously, it had become something others were ready to believe. Germany was broken. Its people were desperate. Its future uncertain. And in that chaos, a voice was about to rise, a voice that promised answers, power, and revenge. But everything it offered came at a cost, and that cost would soon be paid by millions. The voice that rose from Germany's chaos did not begin as a whisper. It began as anger, raw, unfiltered. And for millions of people searching for answers, it sounded like truth. When Adolf Hitler entered politics in 1919, he was not yet a powerful man. He joined a small, obscure group, the German Workers' Party. Few people noticed, even fewer took him seriously. But something happened when he spoke. Crowds didn't just listen, they reacted. His words were simple, emotional, direct. He didn't speak like a politician. He spoke like someone who understood their pain. He blamed the same enemies they had begun to suspect. He repeated the same frustrations they felt, but couldn't explain. And slowly, people began to believe him, not because he proved anything, but because he gave them meaning. If Hitler was just one man, how did his ideas spread so far? Because he didn't create those ideas alone. He tapped into something already there: fear, resentment, humiliation. Germany, after World War I, was unstable. The Treaty of Versailles had crippled the nation. The economy collapsed. Hyperinflation destroyed savings. People burned money just to stay warm. And in times like that, people don't look for complex explanations. They look for someone to blame. Hitler gave them that. And more importantly, he gave them hope, a dangerous kind of hope. The German Workers' Party became something new: the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. And with that transformation, Hitler's ideas became organized, structured, strategic. He understood something many leaders didn't. People don't just follow logic, they follow emotion. So the Nazis created spectacle, torch-lit rallies, uniforms, symbols, flags that filled entire stadiums. Everything was designed to create unity, to make individuals feel part of something larger, something powerful. And at the center of it all was a single message. Germany had been betrayed, and it could only be saved by removing its enemies. If these beliefs already existed, why did they become so deadly under Hitler? Because he turned belief into policy. In 1925, Hitler published Mein Kampf, a manifesto that laid out his worldview. It was filled with hatred, conspiracy theories, and a clear vision of what Germany should become. And he wrote that Jews were not just a religious group, but a racial enemy, an enemy that had to be removed. At the time, many dismissed the book. They thought it was too extreme, too unrealistic. But history would prove something terrifying. He meant every word. In 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, and almost immediately, everything changed. A fire broke out in the German parliament building. Hitler blamed political enemies, used the crisis to justify emergency powers, and within months, Germany was no longer a democracy. It had become a dictatorship. Opposition was silenced. Freedom disappeared. And the state became an extension of Hitler's ideology. At first, the changes seemed gradual, almost manageable. Jews were banned from certain jobs, then from public spaces, then from owning businesses. Each step was small, incremental, and that's what made it dangerous. Because by the time people realized what was happening, it was already too late. Propaganda played a crucial role. Jews were no longer portrayed as individuals, but as threats, parasites, enemies of the nation. Dehumanization made cruelty easier. It made violence acceptable. Why didn't more people resist? Because the system didn't feel like chaos. It felt like order. Many Germans believed they were restoring their country. Others were afraid. And many simply looked away. Indifference became complicity, and silence became permission. Then came 1939, World War II. With the invasion of Poland, millions of Jews came under Nazi control, and what followed was not spontaneous violence. It was planned, organized, engineered. At first, Jews were forced into ghettos, crowded, isolated areas with little food or medical care. But this was only the beginning, because behind the scenes, something far more terrifying was being prepared, a plan that would change history forever. In 1942, Nazi leaders formalized what they called the final solution, a bureaucratic phrase, cold, clinical, but its meaning was simple: extermination. 6 camps were built specifically for mass killing: Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno, Majdanek. These were not prisons, they were systems, factories of death. Trains arrived daily, men, women, children, separated within minutes. Some sent to forced labor, others directly to gas chambers. The process was efficient, deliberate, and horrifyingly routine. By the end of the war, 6 million Jews had been murdered, alongside millions of others. Roma, disabled individuals, political prisoners, entire communities erased, languages silenced, families gone without trace. This was not just genocide, it was an attempt to erase existence itself. When Allied forces liberated the camps, what they found defied comprehension. Survivors were skeletal, barely alive, surrounded by evidence of what had happened. But even after liberation, the suffering did not end. Many had nowhere to go. No homes, no families, no countries willing to accept them. For countless survivors, the war ended, but their search for belonging had only begun. So what does this story mean today? Because it's easy to think of the Holocaust as something distant, something that happened in another time. But the truth is, the conditions that allowed it to happen still exist. Hatred rarely begins with violence. It begins with words, with blame, or with division, with the idea that one group is responsible for society's problems. History shows us something uncomfortable, that ordinary people, in the right conditions, can accept extraordinary cruelty. Not because they are inherently evil, but because they are influenced, persuaded, or silent. So why did Hitler hate the Jews? The answer is not simple. It was not just personal. It was shaped by failure, fueled by ideology, amplified by war, and empowered by a society willing to believe. But perhaps the more important question is this: what allows hatred to grow unchecked? Because the Holocaust was not just the story of one man. It was the story of millions of choices. Choices to follow, to ignore, or to remain silent. And that is what makes it so important to remember, not just what happened, but how it happened. History is full of moments like this, moments when the world changed in ways few people expected. And many of those stories are still waiting to be uncovered. If you want to keep exploring the hidden forces that shaped our world, subscribe to Hidden History, because the past is never as simple as it seems.